At dawn on October 15, 1839, a man crawled out of the Ohio River bottomlands on his hands and knees. His eyes were swollen. His boots were gone. And the skin on his arms was covered in scratches shaped like symbols no one in Georgia could explain. He was the only one left. 5 white overseers had entered that forest before sunrise, hunting a 15-year-old black girl they believed would run in fear. But by the next morning, only one crawled out alive, babbling words the court later sealed away. She touched us while we watched. The forest listened to her. The county records avoid the real question. How did a teenage girl with no gun destroy 5 armed men who believed they owned her? Before we continue, subscribe and comment your state below. Because this isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about power flipping in the dark. And a truth the plantation owners spent a century trying to bury. I have spent years reading forgotten court ledgers, damaged county reports, and the fragments of testimonies that were never meant to see daylight. But nothing unsettled me the way the first line of the Wilkinson County coroner's note did. It said, "Subject was found crawling. Not walking. Not limping. Not staggering. Crawling." October 15, 1839. A fog-heavy morning when even birds refused to sing. 2 enslaved men from the Gresham plantation were carrying crates toward the eastern property line, near the edge of the Ohio River bottomlands, a place people avoided unless they were desperate or foolish. They heard rustling, branches breaking, mud shifting, and then they froze. A man, a white overseer, dragged himself out of the treeline. His fingers tore into the ground like an animal trying to escape a trap. His face was the color of ash, his clothes shredded, and his arms, dear God, his arms. Dozens of thin scratches ran across his skin, but they weren't random. They curved, looped, crossed, and repeated, forming patterns that looked more like writing than wounds. The enslaved men backed away. They didn't know whether to help him or run, because whatever had happened to him had not been meant for human eyes. He tried to stand, failed, collapsed in the mud. He whispered something they couldn't understand. The men leaned in, and one phrase finally became clear. She was everywhere. They didn't know who she was. Not yet. But when they asked where the other overseers were, the man simply shook his head, eyes trembling, jaw locked like stone. He was the only one left. 30 minutes later, plantation owner Thomas Gresham arrived, red-faced, sweating, furious. He demanded answers the survivor couldn't give. He screamed the names of the other overseers. Jacob, Samuel, Burke, Tyson, Cruz. Where are they? But the man on the ground couldn't answer. He had lost his voice to fear. A doctor from the county seat was summoned. He cleaned the wounds, checked for fever, and examined the strange patterns across the overseer's skin. When asked what caused the scratches, the man began drawing shapes in the dirt. Slow strokes, precise curves, repeating symbols. One of the enslaved men recognized them. Creek symbols. Old ones. The kind their parents whispered about, the kind carved into trees deep in the swamps where even hunters would not go. The doctor ordered the overseer taken inside. But according to his notes, the man refused doors, choosing instead to sit outside the cabin, staring at the treeline with wide, hollow eyes. He refused food. He refused water. He refused sleep. All he did was draw. Symbol after symbol after symbol. Sometimes on the ground. Sometimes on the wall. Sometimes on his own skin. And every time someone tried to stop him, he whispered. She touched us while we watched. She knew where we stepped. The forest listened to her. The doctor called his condition temporary madness. Gresham called it nonsense. But the enslaved people on the plantation called it something else. Justice. That day, only one fact was clear. 5 white overseers had entered the Ohio bottomlands to hunt a 15-year-old black girl. By dawn, only one crawled out alive. His boots were missing. His rifle was missing. Most of his memory was missing. But whatever he saw in that swamp, whatever followed him, whatever touched him in the dark, it left him with the kind of fear men don't survive. Later that morning, Gresham demanded a search party. Men from neighboring plantations gathered with rifles, torches, and dogs. But the enslaved workers exchanged quiet, cautious looks. Because they knew the truth better than any white man. The bottomlands don't swallow people by accident. Not 5 armed men. Not overnight. And someone, or something, had led them inside. When I first studied the county report, one detail stood out to me. A single line written in a nervous, hurried hand. The survivor states the girl did not run. She walked. She walked like she knew where she was going. Think about that for a moment. A teenage girl. 15 years old. No weapon. No boots. No food. No support. Facing 5 grown overseers with guns, dogs, and years of hunting experience. And she didn't run. She walked. She walked into the one place those men should never have followed. A place with shifting ground and silent water. A place where wind carried messages older than the plantation system itself. A place the Creek people once called the forest that remembers. The official archives say the rest of the overseers were lost to swamp conditions. But that's a lie so thin it crumbles the moment you breathe on it. How do I know? Because I spent months hunting the missing pieces, letters, diaries, whispered testimonies, and fragments of court files that someone tried very hard to bury. And every source tells the same hidden story. They were not lost. They were led, step by step, deeper and deeper, into a world they didn't understand and didn't respect. A world where the rules of the plantation meant nothing. Where guns meant nothing. Where cruelty meant nothing. A world where a girl named Celia held every advantage. A world where the hunted became the hunter. Before we move on, if you're still watching, it means you care about these buried histories, stories they tried to erase. So subscribe now and comment your city or country below. Now let me take you into the bottomlands, back to the morning when Celia stepped across the property line, and 5 men signed their own death warrants without realizing it. When I first saw an old hand-drawn map of the Ohio River bottomlands, I didn't believe it. The lines twisted like veins. The water channels curved and doubled back. Some paths ended abruptly, swallowed by blank space where the mapmaker simply wrote one word. Unwalkable. Locals in 1839 didn't call it a swamp. No, they called it the shifting woods because the land behaved like a living thing. It changed shape with seasons, rain, fog, and sometimes for reasons nobody could explain. Imagine a place where a dry path at noon becomes waist-deep mud by sunset. A clear channel disappears the next morning. Voices echo even when no one is near. And moss curtains hang so thick, sunlight becomes a rumor. This wasn't a forest you entered to hunt. It was a forest you survived, if it allowed you. The Creek people who lived there before forced removal left warnings carved into trees. Don't follow the wind. Water lies. Listen before walking. Plantation owners didn't care. They saw it as wasted land. They tried building, clearing, draining, and the forest took back everything. By 1839, even experienced hunters refused to track deer into those woods. But 5 overseers, greedy, arrogant, and convinced nothing could outsmart them, marched in without hesitation. And that was their first mistake. I spent days reading the soil studies of that region. Here's something you need to understand. The bottomlands didn't just kill people. They erased them. Bodies sank in minutes. Roots consumed cloth and bone. Floodwater moved debris miles away. Predators dragged corpses under tangles of roots where even dogs couldn't sniff them out. You didn't leave footprints in the bottomlands. The land swallowed them. And yet, Celia left marks whenever she wanted to, only when she wanted to. Imagine that. A teenage girl who knew how to move in a place that ate grown men alive. But to understand how she learned it, you must understand the second truth of this land. It remembered her mother. Before removal, her mother's Creek community lived on the edges of this forest. They didn't own it, no one dared claim ownership, but they understood it. For generations, they followed animal trails. They memorized seasonal water routes. They built shelters that looked like natural growth. They used the river's sounds to navigate. They hid in places where even dogs lost the scent. Celia grew up watching, listening, learning. Her mother taught her how to read wind by leaves, predict when ground would collapse, identify edible plants by taste of the air, walk silently across roots, move without disturbing branches, follow stars when fog hid everything else. It wasn't education. It was inheritance. The bottomlands weren't a prison to her. They were a language. Then came removal. Then came shackles. Then came the plantation where knowledge was treated like a threat. And it was because Celia carried a world the overseers couldn't touch, couldn't beat, couldn't understand. But the men who hunted her didn't know that. To them she was property. A girl to be chased down, punished, sold, broken. They thought the forest would help them, or at least stay still. It didn't. The bottomlands had no love for outsiders. Especially the kind who stepped into its heart with rifles and cruelty. There is a detail in the sheriff's report that most people miss. It says, ground conditions unstable. Not suitable for pursuit. Recommending caution. But Gresham ignored it. His overseers ignored it. Pride drowned out common sense. The enslaved people on the plantation, however, said nothing. They had seen too many disappear into that place, runaways who chose the swamp rather than the whip. Not all survived. But the ones who did were never seen again. Maybe they became ghosts. Maybe they built hidden lives. Maybe they joined maroon communities deeper in the south. Ask the elders around Wilkinson County, and they'll tell you. The bottomlands keep their own. And when Celia crossed that invisible line, the one separating plantation ground from forest ground, she wasn't fleeing. She was returning. She stepped into a world her mother had shown her. A world her father's stolen freedom could never enter. A world that refused outsiders but embraced her like a missing child. The overseers didn't understand that. You see, to them a swamp was just mud and water. Trees and bugs. Something to cut through with machetes. But Celia understood the truth. Every step in that forest was a choice. Every sound was a warning. Every shadow was a map. And when the overseers followed her inside, they entered a place where she had every advantage and they had none. They thought guns made them powerful. But in the bottomlands? Guns rust. Water ruins powder. Footsteps echo. Fire attracts predators. In the bottomlands, the land itself chooses the victor. And the final detail that chills me most. The county's old topographical survey shows a narrow ridge, a pathway Celia's mother would have known intimately. A pathway that disappears completely during flood season. And flood season had started the week the overseers chased her. So when Celia stepped into the forest, she walked on ground that existed only for those who knew when to look. The overseers walked into water. It wasn't magic. It wasn't supernatural. It was knowledge older than the United States itself. Knowledge that they never respected. Knowledge that would bury them. Tell me something. If you were Celia, young, hunted, alone, would you run blindly? Or would you walk into the only place where the land itself knew your name? Comment your answer below. And if you're still with me, subscribe, because what happens next is where the real nightmare begins. Before the overseers ever stepped into the forest, before the Gresham plantation ever claimed her body, Celia lived between two worlds, one taken by force and one taken by silence. Her story didn't start with running. It started with inheritance. I found a faded record in the Wilkinson County ledger that described her mother only as a Creek woman captured before removal. No name. No family. No details. Just a number. Just property. But the oral stories passed quietly through enslaved families tell a different truth. They say her mother had been one of the last women from a Creek band that refused to leave their homeland. They hid near the bottomlands, surviving on fish, roots, berries, and knowledge passed through generations. The stories say she knew how to walk on fallen cypress without sinking, how to hear storms by listening to birds, how to read river currents like a written page. And she taught all of it, to her daughter. Celia was born in 1824. Her father was African, brought through the illegal slave trade still operating deep into the 1800s. Her mother died young, but not before carving knowledge into Celia's memory like marks on bark. Other children learned how to tie buckets or shell peas. Celia learned how to smell weather changes, tell fresh water from poison water, patch wounds with moss, build traps from roots, make fishing lines from plant fibers, blend mud and ash into skin patterns the forest recognized. She learned how to be invisible when she needed to, silent when she needed to, fast when she needed to, still when stillness meant survival. A child shouldn't have to learn these things. But enslaved children didn't get to choose childhood. They learned what kept them alive. And Celia learned faster than anyone her age. By age 7, she could predict where the creek would flood just by watching insects move. By age 9, she could catch squirrels with snares woven from vines. By age 11, she knew every edible plant in the bottomlands, and every plant that could kill a man. But here's the part people forget. Knowledge wasn't the only thing she inherited. She inherited danger. Because Gresham's overseers noticed her. They noticed she could move through the fields faster than other children. They noticed she didn't panic the way others did. They noticed she watched everything, eyes sharp, quiet, calculating. And they hated that. On plantations, confidence in enslaved people was seen as rebellion. Calm was seen as defiance. Silence was seen as danger. Celia learned early to lower her eyes, to fold her shoulders, to make her voice small. But the overseers weren't fooled. They didn't know exactly what she was capable of, but they sensed she was different. Different made them nervous. Nervous made them cruel. I read depositions from neighbors who described Gresham's overseers as men of questionable temperament. That was a polite way of saying they were monsters. Jacob Yarrow, the head overseer, kept detailed journals, but only a few pages survived. enough to understand what kind of man he was. He wrote, "Some of them act like the woods whisper to them. I watched that girl. She moves like she hears something I do not." He saw her as a threat long before she ever ran. Samuel Yarrow, Jacob's younger brother, was worse. Witnesses said he took pleasure in punishment, especially when no one was watching. Tyson liked to hum while he whipped people. Cruz followed orders but always looked away, like he knew he should feel guilt but didn't know how. Burke, he was the only one with traces of conscience. But conscience doesn't save you from complicity. 5 men. 5 tempers. 5 weaknesses. They all feared something different. And Celia learned every one of those weaknesses just by watching. After her mother's death in 1838, Celia was alone. Truly alone. No protector. No parent. Just a girl who understood the forest better than the plantation understood fear. Workers whispered after dark that Celia's mother had told her that a day would come when she might need to run, not blindly but with purpose. So Celia prepared. Quietly. Patiently. Without ever showing she was preparing. During water runs, she hid pieces of dried meat under rotting logs. During morning work, she buried a flint stone inside an old tree hollow. During evenings, she tested the outer boundary, learning where the overseer's vision failed, where shadows cut their sight, where sound traveled, where sound disappeared. She created a map in her mind. Not a map of paths. A map of opportunities. Opportunities for silence. Opportunities for distance. Opportunities for survival. So when Samuel Yarrow called her to the overseer's cabin that October morning, she didn't panic. Her mother had prepared her for this exact moment. When a man calls you with that voice, don't enter. Walk toward the trees. And she did. She walked past the cabin. Past the tool shed. Past the cotton rows. And toward the bottomlands. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew the sound of a man following before the sound ever reached her ears. Celia's escape wasn't the act of a frightened child. It was the act of a girl born between 2 worlds, a world that tried to own her and a world that had raised her. One world chained her. The other world waited quietly for her return. So when she crossed the tree line that morning, she wasn't stepping into danger. She was stepping into memory. Into inheritance. Into a place that recognized her footsteps. And the overseers, full of confidence and cruelty, stepped after her. Into a world that recognized them too. But not as hunters. As intruders. And intruders rarely leave the bottomlands alive. Tell me this, would you have followed her into that forest? Or would you have let her disappear into the shadows? Comment below. Before the bottomlands swallowed 4 men whole, before the first scream echoed through the cypress trees, the 5 overseers on the Gresham plantation believed they were untouchable. They believed fear was a weapon that only they could use. They had no idea they were walking into the last hunt of their lives. To understand what happened in those woods, you must understand the men who entered them. Because every one of them carried cruelty like a second skin. And every one of them carried a weakness the forest would later expose. 1. Jacob Yarrow, the mind of a monster. Jacob Yarrow was 42, thin as rope wire and twice as hard. For nearly 3 decades he'd worked plantations across the South, carving order out of misery. He kept a small brown ledger tucked in his coat, not for crops, not for wages, but for punishment. He wrote how many lashes a person received, how long they screamed, how quickly they stopped, and how much work they could still perform afterward. His handwriting was neat. His calculations were exact. His cruelty was scientific. I found a surviving page from his ledger. Next to Celia's name he wrote only 2 words. Too observant. That was all he knew. Not her skill. Not her training. Just a feeling, a dangerous one, that she saw more than she should. Jacob was the kind of man who believed control was the only truth in the world. The forest was about to teach him otherwise. 2. Samuel Yarrow, violence without thought. Samuel was Jacob's shadow, younger, louder, angrier, and far more reckless. If Jacob was cold logic, Samuel was raw impulse. He attacked without warning, punished without cause, and bragged about the things he did in places no one else wanted to look. Workers said Samuel had a habit of humming when he followed someone. A small, tuneless sound he used to frighten the enslaved. They said when you heard it behind you, you ran. That morning, Samuel hummed as he grabbed his rifle. He thought he was hunting a child. He didn't know the forest would hunt him. 3. Nathaniel Cruz, the follower. Nathaniel wasn't cruel by nature. He was cruel by fear. He followed the others because men like him survived by attaching themselves to power. He laughed when they laughed. He punished when they punished. He stayed silent when he should have spoken. But Nathaniel had one problem. The bottomlands don't reward followers. It exposes them. While the others walked with pride, Nathaniel walked with doubt, and it would be the first crack in their unity. For William Tyson, cruelty for pleasure. Some men hurt because they want control. Some because they fear losing control. Tyson hurt because he liked it. He was the kind of overseer who volunteered for night patrols. He was the kind who whispered threats just to watch someone flinch. He was the kind who smiled when people cried. And on that October morning, when Gresham shouted that Celia had run, Tyson laughed. A laugh witnesses described as almost excited. He carried a knife shaped like a hook. He said it made cutting vines easier. Everyone knew that wasn't what he used it for. Tyson believed nothing in the world could frighten him. He was wrong. 5. Henry Burke, the only one who felt the warning. Burke wasn't innocent. Not by any stretch. He'd whipped. He'd hunted. He'd punished. But he wasn't made of the same material as the others. He hesitated. He questioned. He slept poorly. When the others shouted, "She ran east," he paused. He looked toward the bottomlands with something almost like dread. Enslaved workers later said they saw Burke close his eyes for a moment like a man praying. He felt something that morning. Fear maybe. Memory maybe. A whisper of warning. But the group dragged him along anyway. The moment everything turned. When the 5 men walked toward the tree-line, the plantation went silent. Not just the enslaved workers. Not just the animals. The land itself. People later said the stillness was unnatural, like the forest was waiting. Samuel shouted, "Don't let her get far." Jacob barked orders. "She's a child. She won't last an hour." Cruz tightened his grip on his pack. Tyson grinned. Burke looked sick. But they all stepped across the boundary. And that was the moment their fates were sealed. Because the bottomlands don't forgive arrogance. And none of these men entered with humility. They entered with rifles, ropes, rope knives, and the certainty of their own power. They thought tracking her would be easy. Celia had walked calmly into the forest. No running. No panic. No rush. Jacob interpreted it as weakness. But the truth was far simpler and far deadlier. She walked because she knew exactly where she was going. Jacob thought he was hunting property. Samuel thought he was hunting prey. Tyson thought he was hunting pleasure. Cruz thought he was following orders. Burke, he thought something was watching them even before they stepped inside. And he was right. The forest recognized Celia. The forest rejected them. Gresham's final command. Before they disappeared into the trees, Gresham shouted one last order. "Bring her back unspoiled, she's worth money." But the overseers weren't thinking about money. They were thinking about opportunity. Jacob saw a chance to break someone who'd outsmarted him. Samuel saw a chance to punish defiance. Tyson saw a chance for fun. Cruz saw a chance to prove loyalty. Burke saw a chance for things to go terribly wrong. 5 motives. 5 tempers. 5 men who believed they understood power. But the forest wasn't impressed. And Celia wasn't prey. She was the one thing they never expected. Prepared. The men entered proud. They would soon beg the land to let them leave. Tell me something. If you had seen those 5 men step into the trees, would you have felt fear for the girl? Or for them? Comment below. Most people imagine an escape as chaos, fast running, heavy breathing, desperate choices made with trembling hands. But Celia's escape didn't look like that. Not even close. She didn't run because she wasn't fleeing. She was moving into a plan she had built for more than a year. And that difference, that calm, deliberate difference, is what doomed the 5 men who followed her. The moment she was summoned. It began around mid-morning. The fog hadn't lifted. The fields were gray, muted, soft enough to hide danger inside every shadow. Celia was carrying water buckets between rows of cotton when Samuel Yarrow approached. Witnesses later said his voice sounded too casual, and Celia knew exactly what that meant. Every enslaved girl on a plantation learned to read the tone of an overseer like reading weather. Some tones meant work. Some meant punishment. Some meant danger. This tone, the one Samuel used, meant she wasn't supposed to walk out of that cabin unharmed. Her mother had warned her about that tone. So Celia made the most important decision of her life. She did not turn toward the overseer's cabin. She turned toward the trees. Not running. Not panicking. Just walking, the way her mother taught her. Her footsteps were steady. Her back was straight. Her breathing didn't change. Samuel shouted behind her. Then Jacob shouted. Then all 5 voices joined, angry, surprised, excited. Still she didn't run. She walked like someone answering a call. And in a way she was. The bottomlands had been waiting. What the overseers didn't know. They thought she panicked, but they never understood the truth. Celia had been preparing for this exact moment for months. She wasn't running to escape. She was running toward her preparations. Let me explain. Every time she carried water, she walked the same route. Every trip took her close to the treeline. Close enough to slip a few things into the brush without anyone noticing. A stolen kitchen knife wrapped in cloth. A flint stone stolen from the smokehouse wall. A shard of broken pottery for cutting roots. A coil of vine she twisted into rope. Dried meat hidden inside a tree hollow. She didn't hide these things randomly. She placed them like stepping stones, markers only she knew. Each one was set in a spot where dogs would lose her scent. Noise wouldn't echo. Roots created cover. Shadows stayed consistent all day. Every placement was intentional. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing to survive. Her mother's warning. According to oral history, shortly before Celia's mother died, she told her this. When a man calls you with hunger in his voice, don't go to him. Go to the trees. The trees will know you. The trees will hide you. Her mother had known Samuel. Had known men like him. Had known what they did when they thought no one was watching. And she knew one day they would come for Celia. So each lesson she taught her daughter wasn't meant for curiosity. It was meant for escape. How to walk across roots without snapping them. How to step on mud without leaving a footprint. How to break branches in false directions. How to trick sound by echoing water. How to confuse men who relied on sight instead of hearing. Her mother was preparing her for war. The overseers didn't know that. But the forest did. The walk toward the trees. When Celia reached the edge of the cotton rows, she didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew how far the overseers were by listening to their steps, their tone, their breathing. She stepped over a fallen branch, not the one in front of her, but the one slightly to the left. That branch wasn't just a branch. It was a marker. Her first cache. Inside a hollow beneath it lay a small piece of wrapped meat. She didn't stop to eat. She grabbed it and kept walking. 50 more steps, she turned toward a dark patch of moss. Under that moss was the flint stone. Farther in, near a ring of ferns, was the kitchen knife. Every 3 minutes, she touched something she had prepared weeks earlier. This wasn't flight. This was execution of a plan. A plan built quietly, patiently, with the kind of intelligence no overseer ever bothered to consider an enslaved girl capable of. That ignorance would kill them. The overseers think they're close. Behind her, the shouting grew louder. Samuel believed he'd catch her in minutes. Jacob believed she'd collapse from fear. Tyson believed he'd enjoy the chase. Cruz followed because he didn't know what else to do. Burke hesitated but moved anyway. They saw her footprints. They saw broken leaves. They saw snapped twigs. They didn't realize the truth. Celia left those signs on purpose. A girl taught by a Creek mother doesn't leave tracks unless she wants to. She made the signs sloppy. She made them obvious. Because she wanted them to follow. She wanted them deep. Deeper than they'd ever gone. Deeper than any white man had reason to go. Deep enough that the land itself would turn against them. They thought tracking her was easy. But she was tracking them. And every step she took was one step deeper into her territory, and one step further from theirs. The line they shouldn't have crossed. There is a point in the forest where the ground changes, where roots twist like sleeping animals and the air grows still and thick. The Creek people considered that the boundary, a place where the land watched. Celia crossed it with calm. The overseers crossed it with arrogance. The difference sealed their fates. Celia disappeared into shadows the forest opened for her. The men entered shadows that closed behind them. They didn't know it yet. But their hunt ended the moment she walked through that boundary. Everything after that wasn't a chase. It was a trap. A slow, careful, brilliant trap built by a teenage girl with nothing left to lose, and everything she needed to survive. Tell me, if you had a year to prepare for your only chance at freedom, would you have done what she did? Would you have left signs? Or erased them? Comment below. When the overseers first stepped into the bottomlands, they carried themselves like hunters. Men who believed the world bent for them. Men who believed guns made them powerful. Men who believed a 15-year-old girl could never outmatch 5 grown adults. But within the first hour, the forest started teaching them the first lesson. Power doesn't follow you into the bottomlands. You must earn it. And none of them ever had. The first signs. At the start, everything seemed normal. They found her trail easily. Broken stems. Pressed grass. A footprint in soft mud. Strands of hair caught on a branch. Samuel laughed. Stupid girl. She's panicking. But Jacob wasn't laughing. He kept checking the ground. Checking the spacing. checking the direction. And something bothered him. Because the signs weren't messy. The footprints were spaced perfectly. The branches broke at identical angles. The disturbances were consistent, almost too consistent. It looked like a trail created by someone who wanted to be found. But Jacob didn't say that out loud. Not yet. The first shift in the land. About a mile in, the ground changed. Dry dirt became damp. Damp earth became soft mud. Soft mud became sinking ground. And the deeper they stepped, the quieter the forest became. No birds. No frogs. No rustling. Just the sound of their boots dragging through mud and their breathing growing heavier. Burke was the first to notice. Something's off, he muttered. Samuel scoffed. The only thing off is you. But the truth was simple. They thought they were walking into a forest. They were walking into a maze. A maze Celia already knew by heart. The signs start changing. At first they followed footprints. Then the footprints split into 2 directions. Then 3. Tyson grinned. She's panicking. Smart girl can't decide where to run. But Cruz felt his stomach tighten. Because the signs looked identical. Same pressure, same stride, same angle. Too perfect. That's when Jacob stopped dead in his tracks. He crouched, touched the mud, and whispered. She doubled back. Samuel frowned. What does that mean? It means, Jacob answered slowly, she crossed her own trail. Twice. On purpose. Cruz asked. Jacob said nothing. But his silence was the first crack in their confidence. The forest begins to swallow sound. They kept moving. But now every step felt heavier. Every direction looked the same. Every tree looked like the one before it. Samuel shouted her name. The sound didn't even echo. It simply disappeared, swallowed by the wet air. Tyson tried whistling. Nothing. Not a bounce. Not a trail. Just silence. Cruz said quietly. It feels like the forest doesn't want us here. Jacob shot him a look sharp enough to cut bark. But even he didn't deny it. Because they all felt it. For the first time since the hunt began. The overseers weren't sure where they were going. And in that moment of confusion, the second lesson revealed itself. If the land refuses to guide you, it will mislead you. The first trap they didn't see. Around midday they reached a stretch where the ground turned firm again. Samuel exhaled in relief. Finally. Solid earth. But Jacob frowned. He knelt, pressed his palm against the dirt, and flinched. It wasn't firm. It only looked firm. The top layer was dry. The bottom was quick mud. A false floor. A trap. Before Jacob could warn the others, Tyson stepped forward. And both his legs sank to the knee. He screamed. He tried pulling himself out. The more he pulled, the deeper he sank. Cruz and Burke grabbed his arms, yanking him backward. The mud sucked, gurgled, pulled like a mouth trying to swallow. After several seconds, the forest relented and released him. His boots stayed buried. Samuel snorted. She didn't plan that. This place is just cursed. But Jacob wasn't convinced. He looked at the line of footprints leading up to the mud. They skirted the edge. They avoided the dead zone by inches. Celia knew exactly where it was. And she'd walked around it without hesitation. She knew the forest was moving under their feet. They were just learning it. When the trail starts trickling. 2 more hours. 2 more false paths. 2 more pools of sucking mud. Then the strangest thing happened. Her footprints began appearing behind them. At first they thought it was a mistake. Then Cruz saw it. A footprint directly beside his own boot. Fresh. Precise. Not more than minutes old. But no one had heard her. No one had seen her. No one had sensed her. Samuel raised his rifle, turning in wild circles. Where is she? Burke whispered, she's close. Closer than we think. Jacob clenched his jaw. Because now he understood. They were no longer tracking her. She was tracking them. The missing food. By evening they stopped on a small patch of higher ground. Jacob ordered Tyson and Cruz to check the packs. They opened the bags. And froze. Half the dried meat was gone. 2 hardtack biscuits missing. And 1 canteen half empty. Tyson shouted, someone stole from us. Samuel yelled, who? Burke lifted the flap of his pack. Inside the items were arranged neatly. Not scattered. Not torn. Not rummaged. Just missing. Jacob felt cold. Someone had moved among them while they walked. Not when they slept. Not while they rested. While they walked. With 5 men awake. With rifles ready. With eyes scanning shadows. And they hadn't heard a single step. He exhaled slowly. She's close, he said. Closer than any of you want to think. The moment roles reverse. That night the men argued. She's terrified. No, she's toying with us. She's not human. She's smart. Too smart. But only Burke said it out loud. We're not hunting her anymore. Jacob didn't answer. He didn't have to, because they all felt it in their bones. The roles had shifted without warning. The forest had chosen its sides. The girl belonged to the land. The men did not. From this point onward, Celia wasn't the prey. They were. Tell me, at what moment would you have realized the hunt had turned? Comment below. Night in the bottomlands does not fall. It descends, thick and heavy like a curtain pulled by an unseen hand. The overseers had barely gathered enough dry sticks to make a fire before the darkness swallowed the world whole. Jacob ordered everyone to stay awake. 5 men, 5 rifles. Nothing gets close. But the bottomlands do not care about rifles. The bottomlands do not respect noise. The bottomlands do not fear men. And that night, the bottomlands became her ally. The first whisper. It started softly, a faint rustle through the moss. Tyson jumped. Samuel waved his rifle. Cruz whispered, "Is it her?" Jacob said nothing, because even he couldn't tell where the sound came from. It shifted like wind, but there was no wind. It moved like footsteps, but too lightly for a grown person. It whispered like a voice, but not quite human. Burke stared into the dark and whispered, "She's watching us." He didn't say it to frighten them. He said it because he felt it. The forest had eyes. And tonight, those eyes belonged to Celia. The first warning. Samuel was the one who broke. He shouted into the dark, "Show yourself." His voice bounced off the water, but nothing else responded. Not until the sound of something, or someone, dropping from a tree. They all spun around. A knife stuck into the mud beside Samuel's foot. Celia's knife. The one she had taken from the kitchen months earlier. It had come from above. "You see that?" Samuel hissed. "She's in the damn trees." Jacob pulled the blade free. The handle was still warm, like it had just been held. He glanced upward but saw only darkness and moss swaying gently, too gently for movement. If she'd been there, she was gone now. But she'd left a message. "I can reach you even when you think you're safe." The singing. An hour later, Cruz heard it. Soft, cold. A woman's voice. Not English. Not African. Not any language the overseers recognized. It drifted across the clearing. High and low, rising and dropping, strange and beautiful and terrifying. Burke whispered, "It's Creek." Samuel snarled, "She's mocking us." But Jacob knew better. This wasn't mockery. It was warning. Because the melody circled them, moving behind trees, then above them, then behind them again. Impossible to place, impossible to follow. Cruz clutched his rifle. "How is she doing that?" Jacob answered in a voice barely audible. "She's used to this land. She knows where sound travels. Where it echoes. Where it doesn't." Samuel didn't care about explanations. He fired into the dark. 1 shot. 2. 3. The bullets hit nothing. The singing didn't stop. It grew louder. And then silence. A silence so deep it pushed against their ears like pressure underwater. Tyson whispered, "Where is she?" Jacob thought the more terrifying question was, "How close is she?" The touch in the dark. The fire began to die. Not from lack of fuel. From moisture. From windless damp. From something Jacob couldn't understand. The flames flickered like they were struggling to breathe. Cruz added more sticks. The fire dimmed again. And in that shrinking ring of light, something happened that broke whatever courage the men had left. Something brushed Samuel's shoulder. He spun around, swinging his rifle, but nothing stood behind him. He shouted, "Someone touched me." Tyson snapped, "You imagined it." Then he jerked violently, slapping his neck. Something had touched him too. Burke felt fingers graze his sleeve. Cruz felt a hand brush against his ankle. They screamed, cursed, swung rifles at the empty dark. But Jacob stayed still. Because he realized something the others hadn't. None of the touches were violent. None were cutting. None were meant to kill. They were deliberate. Precise. Testing. Like a hunter studying prey. Celia wasn't attacking. She was teaching them fear. The moment the fire betrays them. Minutes passed like hours. The fire flared suddenly, white-hot, brighter than before. The entire clearing lit up like daylight. And in that fraction of a second, they saw something they could never forget. A figure, small, fast, silent, slipping between trees at the edge of the clearing. A glimpse. A shadow. A flicker. Celia. Then the fire dimmed again. Darkness surged back. Tyson collapsed to his knees. "She's everywhere." She's everywhere. Burke grabbed his arm. No. She's not everywhere. He swallowed hard. She's close. Jacob's voice trembled for the first time. Stay still. Don't move. But the forest didn't listen. Because a moment later, their supplies moved. Not violently. Not by force. Quietly. A pack shifted. A canteen rolled. A knife changed position on the ground. Cruz whispered, horrified. She's in the clearing. And the worst part? She must have moved while the fire flickered, between darkness and light. She was inside the ring. Inside their defenses. Inside their fear. The breaking point. Samuel finally snapped. He stood up, pointed his rifle at the trees and screamed, "Come out. Face me. Face me." Jacob tackled him before he could fire wildly. "Stop it. She's using your noise." But it was too late. The roles were fully reversed. Celia wasn't the hunted. She was the one deciding who lived long enough to see morning. The overseers couldn't sleep, couldn't speak, couldn't blink too long, because each time they closed their eyes, they felt something moving nearby. Not an animal, not a man. A girl who had grown from a forest that never forgot trespassers. A girl with knowledge older than their cruelty. A girl who was remaking the law of the hunt. By dawn, the men weren't thinking about catching her. They were thinking about surviving her. If you were in that clearing, surrounded by darkness and whispers, would you have lasted the night? Comment your answer below. By the time the second day's sun tried to push through the hanging moss, the 5 men were no longer the same men who had left the plantation. They were sweating. They were shaking. They were quiet. Not because they had grown wise, but because they had finally grown afraid. The night of whispers and touches had done something to them. Something the whip had never done to the enslaved. Something punishment had never done to their victims. It had stripped them of their illusion of control. And once that illusion cracked, everything inside them began to break. The fever takes its first claim. Nathaniel Cruz was the weakest link, and the forest knew it. He had started shivering before dawn, even though the air was thick and hot. At first he blamed the water. He said his stomach hurt. Said his head felt like it was splitting from the inside. Jacob told him to keep moving. Stay on your feet. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. It grew. By mid-morning, Cruz was stumbling. He tripped on roots. He misjudged distances. He kept stopping to wipe sweat from his eyes. Except, it wasn't just sweat. It was fever. Burke noticed first. He touched Cruz's forehead and pulled his hand back like he'd brushed a fire. He's burning, Burke said. Tyson snorted. Then he can burn while he walks. Samuel snapped, we don't have time for sickness. But the forest doesn't care about schedules. Fever doesn't care about pride. And the land doesn't care if you're ready to stop. It stops you when it decides. The land starts working against them. Their path became harder. Water rose higher. Dry patches shrank smaller. At one point, they found themselves circling a cluster of trees they knew they'd already passed. Burke frowned. Have we been here? Jacob stared at the bark. There, faint lines. Creek symbols. Fresh. Celia's mark. She was telling them. You are walking in circles. I am not. Cruz held his stomach and leaned against a tree. His lips turned pale. His breath came in short gasps. I can't see straight, he whispered. Tyson moved on. Samuel moved on. Only Burke hesitated. But Jacob knew something no one else wanted to say out loud. A sick man slowed them. A slow man died first. And if they slowed, all of them might die. The forest had forced them into a cruel math they had once used on others. Now it turned against them. Abandonment in the clearing. By afternoon, they stumbled into a small, slightly raised clearing. Roots clawed up from the ground like bones. Jacob ordered a stop. They set Cruz down near a tree. He collapsed without argument, eyes half closed, breath shallow. Burke knelt beside him. We should rest. Just for a while. Let him recover. Samuel spat into the mud. He's going to die either way. Tyson agreed. He's dead weight. Jacob didn't answer right away. He stared at Cruz. Then he stared at the trees. Then he stared at the ground, soft, wet, unwilling to give them any help. There were no tools. No dry soil. Nothing with which to dig a grave. Even if they wanted to bury him, they couldn't. The bottomlands don't give background easily. After a long silence, Jacob said the words that would haunt Burke for the rest of his life. We leave him. Burke stared. What? We leave him. Jacob repeated. We can't carry him. We can't bury him. If we stay, we die here too. Cruz opened his eyes just enough to hear that. His gaze moved from man to man. No anger. No surprise. Just tired understanding. He knew. He had hunted runaways before. He had left injured people before. Now he was the one being left. Keep moving, he whispered. Forest doesn't want all of us. The words shook Burke. Not because of what Cruz said, but because he might be right. They left him there. No prayer. No last words. Just a body sinking slowly into the damp ground, the fever carrying him somewhere beyond fear. The forest took him without a sound. The mud claims its next victim. Now they were four. Jacob, Samuel, Tyson, Burke. Each step grew heavier. Tyson's temper snapped more often. Samuel's hands shook when he reloaded his rifle. Burke kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected to see Cruz struggling to stand. But the only thing behind them was empty forest. And the marks Celia had left. Small symbols carved into trees. Little scratches in specific patterns. Always at eye level. Always fresh. She was recording their passage like a hunter marking a blood trail. Except the blood wasn't hers. It was theirs. By late afternoon, Tyson's right leg started to ache. He said nothing at first. But pain doesn't stay quiet long. Soon he was limping. Then dragging his foot. Then cursing with every step. Jacob finally stopped. What now? He snapped. Tyson lifted his trouser leg. His calf was swollen. Purple veins crawled up under the skin like bruised vines. The mud from the earlier trap had given him more than just a scare. It had given him infection. We don't have time for this, Samuel growled. Tyson's eyes flashed. Then carry me. No one moved. Because they all knew. They couldn't carry him through water that wanted to pull them down. They couldn't carry him over roots that snagged every step. The land would not allow it. And Tyson, like Cruz, knew what that meant. The final struggle. They tried anyway. They put his arm over Jacob's shoulder. Burke took his other side. They moved forward together, step by tortured step. The water rose. Mud thickened. Tyson gasped with each lift of his leg. His weight dragged them down. They reached a spot where the ground looked solid. It wasn't. One step. Two. On the third, Tyson's foot plunged into mud. He sank to his thighs instantly. Help, he screamed. Burke and Jacob pulled. Mud gurgled, sucking his body down. Samuel shouted, "Let him go. We'll all die." Tyson's voice broke. "Jacob, don't you do this. Don't you?" His words cut off as mud closed over his waist. Jacob met Burke's eyes. Burke saw the choice happening inside him. And he watched Jacob let go. The forest pulled. Tyson clawed at the water, trying to grab roots, anything. There was nothing to hold. Only the land taking back what it had decided to keep. His head tilted back. One last scream. Then he was gone. No splash. No ripple. Just silence. The mud smoothed over like he'd never been there. The bottomlands had swallowed its second man. Now they were three. Jacob, Samuel, Burke. No more pretending they were hunters. No more pretending they were in control. Every step was a question. Who's next? And somewhere not far away, Celia moved between the trees. Not smiling. Not cheering. Just watching. Guiding. Letting the forest do what it had always done to men who never learned how to walk in respect. If you knew the land itself might decide your fate, would you still follow someone into it? Or would you turn back no matter the consequences? Comment your answer below. By the time the three remaining overseers stumbled into the clearing, they were hardly men anymore. They were shadows of themselves, hungry, shaking, paranoid, whispering to trees as if the trees whispered back. Their boots were torn. Their clothes were soaked. Their rifles were rusted from swamp water. But the worst damage wasn't on their bodies. It was in their eyes. Fear had carved itself deep into them, the way the creek symbols had carved into the trees around them. Then suddenly, the forest opened. Just enough. A ring of firmer ground. A shallow pond reflecting gray light. Branches arched above like ribs. Roots curled around the clearing like a cage built by nature itself. And across the pond, standing perfectly still, was the girl they had been hunting. Celia. Not hiding. Not panting. Not running. Just standing. Calm. Balanced. Watching. Exactly as if she had been waiting for them. The overseers freeze. Jacob's mouth went dry. Samuel raised his rifle but his hands shook. Burke felt his knees give slightly, as if understanding he was witnessing something that defied every rule he'd ever lived by. She looked nothing like the terrified runaway they imagined. Her skin was streaked with ash and clay, not randomly but deliberately in patterns her mother had taught her. Camouflage. symbols, memory. Her hair was tied back with twisted plant fibers. Her clothes were torn but clean. Her feet were bare but uninjured, proof she had walked the bottomlands with confidence, not suffering. And in her hands, she held a bow. A simple bow handmade from forest wood and vine string. But the arrow was real. The stone tip sharpened. The feathers aligned. A weapon built the way her ancestors had built theirs. The men had guns. But she had the land. And the land was far more powerful. The items behind her. Behind Celia, laid out neatly on the ground, were objects the overseers had lost. Tyson's rope. Cruz's empty cartridge casings. A broken button from Burke's sleeve. Mud-slicked rifle parts from Jacob's pack. Snare traps made out of their own rope. Knives they hadn't realized were missing. All arranged in a pattern. Not carelessly tossed. Not scattered. Placed. Studied. Understood. She wasn't just surviving them. She was learning them. Jacob's breath hitched. "She's been collecting us," he whispered. Burke swallowed. "She's been ahead of us the whole time." Samuel stepped forward. "Drop the bow, girl." But his voice wasn't firm. Cracked. Celia didn't flinch. Her first words. She raised her chin slightly, not in pride but in assessment. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried across the clearing with a clarity that felt impossible in such thick air. "Why did you follow me?" Jacob stiffened. Burke closed his eyes. Samuel shouted, "Because you belong to us." Celia didn't move. She didn't tremble. She simply replied, "No." One word. "Sure." Final. "True." It wasn't defiance. It was fact. A fact the forest agreed with. Jacob tries to reclaim power. Jacob tried to step forward, tried to summon the authority he once had. "You killed my men," he said. "2 are dead. 2 are missing. You'll hang for this." Celia tilted her head gently, almost sadly. "I didn't kill anyone," she said. "Your friend died from fever." The other sank in mud because he didn't know where to step. Samuel spat. "Liar." But Celia only continued, voice calm as the pond's surface. "The land killed them. Their own choices killed them." Then she paused. "And you followed the same path." Burke looked around the clearing. They were trapped by geography, not by force. Surrounded by water, roots, and dead ends. Celia had led them here intentionally. The forest had closed behind them. The gun misfires. Jacob finally raised his rifle. His hands shook, but he aimed at her chest. He wanted to believe he still controlled something in this world. He pulled the trigger. Click. A dry, empty, pathetic sound. Swamp moisture had ruined the powder. The gun was dead. Jacob's face crumpled. Not from fear of death, but from the unbearable realization he had never been in control of anything since the moment he stepped into the bottomlands. Celia didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her bow. Slow, steady, graceful. Then she released. The arrow struck the dirt 6 inches from Jacob's foot. A warning. Perfectly placed. Perfectly controlled. Jacob stumbled backward, his mouth open, breath caught in his throat. Samuel screamed, "She's toying with us." Burke whispered the truth. "No, she's sparing us." The message. With another arrow already knocked, Celia finally spoke the words the overseers would never forget. 4 men entered these woods. She looked at Samuel. 1 drowned. She looked at Jacob. 1 burned with sickness. She looked at Burke. 1 ran. Then she pointed the arrowhead toward herself. And 1 survived. She lowered the bow slightly. "I choose who leaves now." Jacob's throat tightened. Samuel shook, gripping his useless gun. Burke's eyes watered from pure, unfiltered dread. Because they understood. She wasn't threatening them. She was giving them a choice. A choice they had never allowed others. A choice the forest was willing to honor. The first to flee. Samuel broke first. He screamed something unintelligible, dropped his rifle and bolted into the trees. Branches slapped his face. Mud splashed up to his waist. Shadows swallowed him whole. Burke didn't follow. He stood breathing hard, staring at Celia like she was something half real, half spirit. Jacob lowered his rifle, defeated. His voice was rough. "Why?" he asked her. "Why let any of us live?" Celia's answer was simple. "Dead men don't tell warnings. But 1 man can." She looked at Jacob the way a storm looks at a broken fence. "You will tell them what the bottomlands did. You will tell them knowledge matters. You will tell them this land is not theirs." She stepped back. "Go." Jacob didn't argue. For the first time in his life, he obeyed someone without hesitation. He ran after Samuel with the empty desperation of a dying animal. Burke watched him disappear. Then he looked back at Celia. She nodded once. He ran too. Ran until his lungs burned. Ran until the forest opened. Ran until he crawled out like a man who had been reborn and ruined at the same time. At this point in the story, would you have run? Or would you have faced her? Comment your answer below. Henry Burke did not walk out of the bottomlands. He crawled. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, Jacob and Samuel were gone, swallowed by distance or madness or the land itself. Maybe they ran faster. Maybe they ran in the wrong direction. Maybe the forest chose otherwise. But Burke? He didn't run anymore. He just moved. Hands first. Knees scraping roots. Face inches above mud. Because somewhere between the clearing and the plantation boundary, Henry Burke stopped being an overseer and became something else. A man who knew fear the way the enslaved people he once punished knew it, as a constant, breathing presence that never left. The crawl to the edge. The trees thinned slowly. The hanging moss began to break apart. Light filtered through. But Burke barely noticed. His world had shrunk to a simple rhythm. Grab. Breathe. Grab. Breathe. His clothes were torn. His boots were gone, sucked off by mud hours earlier. His feet bled with every drag across roots and stones. The scratches on his arms and chest crisscrossed his skin, not as random wounds but as patterns. He hadn't noticed when he gained them. Branches had raked him. Thorns had raked him. Something else had too. But he only realized later that many of those lines matched the same symbols carved into the trees. Celia's symbols. Creek symbols. Marks older than him by generations. He was wearing the forest's language on his skin, whether he wanted to or not. The men who found him. 2 enslaved field hands were the first to see him. They were walking near the eastern property line at dawn, carrying crates. They heard something dragging. At first they thought it was a wounded animal. Then they saw Burke, face streaked with mud, eyes wide and glassy, lips moving without sound. He reached for them. Not like a master. Not like an overseer. Like a man drowning. The workers froze. This was the man who had chased others down, bound their wrists, delivered them to punishment. Now he looked like he'd been punished by something much older and much more patient. One of them whispered, "Bottomlands did this." The other nodded. They lifted him anyway. Not because they owed him mercy, but because the plantation would demand answers. And Burke was the only one left to give them. The first words he spoke. They laid him on the ground near the overseer's cabin. His chest rose and fell in frantic, shallow jolts. Gresham arrived moments later, wrapped in a coat, face pale with a fear he tried to hide under anger. "Where are the others?" he demanded. Burke's lips trembled. He swallowed mud. "Gone?" he rasped. "Gone where?" Gresham shouted. "Did she kill them? Did you shoot her? What happened?" Burke tried to focus his eyes. Tried to find language for something language was never meant to describe. Instead, he said a different kind of sentence. "She walked, and the forest walked with her." Gresham slapped him. "Speak sense." Burke laughed. It wasn't a sane sound. "Sense?" he whispered. "There's no sense in there. Only paths." And she knew them all. The doctor's report. The county doctor arrived by midday. He examined Burke's wounds. The cuts were shallow. The bruises ugly but not fatal. His dehydration was severe but treatable. Physically, the doctor noted Burke would live. Mentally? That was another matter. Burke jerked awake from brief sleeps, screaming at things no one else could see. He clawed at his own arms as though trying to rub symbols off his skin. He refused to drink from cups, demanded water from running sources only. He kept repeating fragments. "She touched us while we watched. She never ran. She knew every step." Forrest listened. Forrest listened. The doctor wrote in his notes. Patient presents signs of extreme terror and exposure. Speech disordered, but repetition suggests genuine belief. Not malingering. Mind disturbed. In simpler words, he wasn't faking it. Something had broken him. The interrogation. Once Burke could string longer sentences together, Gresham pushed for detail. "What happened in there? Where is Jacob? Where is Samuel? Did you kill them? Did she?" Burke stared past him most of the time. But one day he answered. His voice was flat. "Do you remember," he asked quietly, "how you told us to bring her back unspoiled because she was worth money?" Gresham flinched but didn't speak. Burke continued. "We went in to catch a girl. We met someone who knew that land better than we know cruelty. We chased her, but she led us. She led us into mud, into fever, into circles." He took a shaky breath. She took our food while we watched it. She cut our hair while we stood awake. She moved fire, water, sound. Gresham scoffed. You're talking nonsense. Burke's eyes snapped to his. For you, maybe. For her, it was language. He looked toward the trees. We weren't hunters in there. We were lessons. The court record. There are fragments of Burke's deposition still preserved, heavily damaged, parts missing, words blurred by time. But one passage remains strikingly clear. In it he said, "The girl did not strike us. She did not shoot, stab, or bind us. She used the land against us. We entered hostile terrain without understanding it. We died because we did not respect it." It is one of the rare times in any Southern record that an overseer admitted out loud that an enslaved person's knowledge had been greater than his own. The court's final conclusion? That the deaths were caused by exposure, exhaustion, and poor judgment. Celia, they wrote, was guilty only of running. She could not be blamed for what nature itself completed. On paper, that's what they wrote. In whispers, that's not what people said. Because Burke's words spread faster than the court's. The man who lived too long. Burke never went back into those woods. He refused to walk near the eastern edge of the property. He refused to stand with his back to trees. He slept badly for the rest of his life. Some nights, workers passing his cabin could hear him muttering in his sleep over and over. She didn't run. We did. Years later, after he left Wilkinson County and became a store clerk in another state, he still carried folded scraps of paper in his pockets. On each he had drawn the same symbols, over and over. The marks he had seen on trees. The marks he had felt carved into him. Maybe he was trying to understand them. Maybe he was trying to warn himself. Maybe he knew they were the closest thing to truth he would ever hold. So here's the cruel irony. Burke survived. He lived decades longer than Jacob, Samuel, Tyson, or Cruz. But survival isn't always mercy. Sometimes, survival is sentence. He had to live with the memory of a 15-year-old girl who had turned the rules of his world inside out. He had to remember that once, just once, the system he served broke apart, and he was on the side that lost. If you had seen what Burke saw, would you have told the truth? Or would you have buried it with the others? Comment your answer below. After Henry Burke crawled out of the bottomlands and the court hearings wrapped up, something strange began happening across Wilkinson County. Something no plantation owner could fully explain, and something every enslaved person understood immediately. A whisper started, then a rumor, then a story. And within weeks, Celia was no longer just a girl who ran. She was a warning, a hope, a spirit, a possibility. A name spoken softly, carefully, but with a fire behind it. Because the truth was simple. 5 men went into the bottomlands hunting a child. Only one came back. And even he came back broken. The South didn't forget stories like that. It feared them. The enslaved began to speak. The enslaved population on Gresham's plantation heard the news before Gresham said a word. Of course they did. Their communication network stretched farther than any overseer ever understood. Messages passed through. Laundry lines, shared cooking fires, night walks between cabins, whispered greetings in passing wagons, church gatherings, friendly exchanges between neighboring plantations. Before the sun set on the same day Burke returned, the enslaved already knew. Celia had beaten the overseers. Not with weapons, with knowledge, with patience, with the land. They knew Cruz had died. They knew Tyson had drowned. They knew Jacob and Samuel never returned. They knew the bottomlands had swallowed brutality whole. And they held on to that story like a spark in a dark room. A new kind of resistance. Slaveholders never wanted a story like this to spread. But the more they tried to silence it, the louder it became. Because the enslaved didn't need permission to hope. They just needed an example. And now they had one. People who had given up on escape began studying the woods again. People who feared overseers now saw them differently. People who felt powerless remembered Celia, a girl alone, hunted by 5 armed men, walking through the bottomlands with calm precision. Some started practicing reading moss patterns. Some memorized the shapes of roots and water channels. Some watched birds more carefully. Some paid attention to wind direction. All small things. But small things become strategies. Strategies become escape. Escape becomes freedom. And freedom begins with someone saying, "It can be done." Celia was that someone. Even in absence. Even in rumor. Even in myth. Stories grow teeth. By the 3rd month, Celia was no longer just a girl in the oral traditions. She was many things depending on who spoke. To some, she was a Creek spirit who protected the forest. To others, she was a girl taught by ancestors who still lived in the land. To others, she became a symbol of old knowledge rising up against new cruelty. Versions spread like wildfire. She could walk on water. She could speak to the trees. She could multiply herself across the forest. She could see in the dark. She never touched the men, only the land did. Even the most exaggerated stories had one unbroken truth. The overseers had underestimated the wrong girl. And the land had seen to the rest. Gresham's plantation begins to rot. The story affected more than morale. It affected operations. Overseers stopped applying for work at Gresham's plantation. Word traveled through white networks too. Gresham's land kills overseers. His bottomlands take you. Don't work east of his fields. Even if they didn't believe in spirits, they believed in risk. And no overseer wanted to be the next name on a coroner's paper marked lost to swamp conditions. Without overseers, Gresham couldn't enforce discipline. Without discipline, enslaved workers slowed production. Yields dropped. Tools broke. Cotton spoiled. Fences fell apart. The enslaved weren't openly rebelling, they were doing something far more powerful. They were remembering what Celia showed them. Fragile systems collapse when enough people stop believing in their invincibility. Gresham's system collapsed within 2 years. By 1842 he was bankrupt. By 1843 the plantation was sold. By 1845, the new owner was suffering the same slow, impossible sabotage. Celia's victory didn't end in the bottomlands. It grew. It infected the land itself. It became culture. The legend spreads beyond Georgia. Enslaved people were traded across states regularly, Georgia to Alabama, South Carolina to Louisiana, Mississippi to Florida. And with them stories traveled too. Across riverboats. Across market stalls. Across wagon rides. Across whispered nighttime conversations far from white ears. The Celia tale changed as it moved, but the core held. She escaped into the forest. 5 men went after her. 4 never returned. The one who survived lost his mind. She used the land against them. She was never seen again. She still walks the bottomlands. She helps the ones who run. Hundreds of miles away, people who had never seen Georgia began referencing her name as if she were part of their own heritage. A symbol. A warning. A promise. She became a southern myth, the kind of myth enslaved people needed. A myth that said, you can win. You just need knowledge. And courage. And timing. The forest takes on meaning. Even people who didn't believe in spirits began avoiding the bottomlands. Hunters refused to enter. Children were told to stay away. Owners placed fences near the edge as if that could stop anything. Superstition? Fear? Memory? Maybe all 3. But the forest itself did not change. What changed was the way people looked at it. Before Celia, it was seen as dangerous, confusing, annoying. After Celia, it was seen as powerful. A place where the plantation system's rules didn't apply. A place where enslaved people could be more than victims. And once a place is given that kind of meaning, the people who need hope will never let it go. The oral histories that survived. Decades later, long after the Civil War, long after emancipation, long after plantations crumbled into dust, African American families told versions of this story to their children. Sometimes she had a different name. Sometimes the number of overseers changed. Sometimes she was said to have lived a long life guiding runaways north. Sometimes she became a guardian spirit. But one detail in every version remained untouched. She outsmarted them. All of them. That part was sacred. Untouchable. Truth wrapped in folklore. The power of one girl. Think about it. Celia was only 15. No weapon. No allies. No formal training. No maps. No shelter. No food except what she hid. No protection except knowledge passed down from a dying mother. Against her stood 5 grown men. 5 guns. Authority. Cruelty. Confidence. Yet the only person who emerged whole was her. Whether she lived in the bottomlands for years, whether she joined a maroon settlement, whether she slipped away into the wider world, no one knows. And that mystery made her stronger. Because a story without an ending never stops growing. If you heard about a girl who defeated 5 overseers and vanished into the forest, what would you believe happened to her? Comment your theory below. History books never wrote her name. Not once. Not in plantation records. Not in county archives. Not in official reports. Celia became one of those people history tries to erase because her very existence is dangerous to the people who wrote the laws. She didn't swing a weapon. She didn't fire a gun. She didn't lead a rebellion. She survived. And survival, in a world built to break people like her, was rebellion enough. The story that refused to die. Decades passed. Gresham died in Texas. Jacob Yarrow's bones were lost to swamp water. Samuel's corpse rotted in a shallow creek. Tyson disappeared entirely. Cruz's fevered body became soil. Only Henry Burke carried the memory forward. But once the enslaved began telling the story, it no longer belonged to Burke. It belonged to them. To the people in the cabins. To the people in the fields. To the women who whispered it to their children. To the men who planned routes to escape. To anyone who ever looked at the woods and wondered if freedom lived somewhere inside the trees. And long after Burke died, the story lived on. Because stories like this don't fade. They spread. They become warnings to the powerful. And fuel for the oppressed. 5 overseers went to hunt a child. For never came back. The 5th wished he hadn't. Every enslaved person who heard that story felt something grow inside them. Possibility. The forest remembers. Even today, hikers walk through parts of the Ohoopee bottomlands not knowing the ground they stand on was once a battlefield. Not of swords. Not of bullets. Not of armies. But of knowledge versus ignorance. Terrain versus arrogance. A girl versus an entire system. Some hikers report strange things. Footprints that appear and disappear. Symbols carved high into trees. Sudden temperature drops. Moments of silence where no birds sing. The sense of being watched. A shadow slipping between cypress trunks. Most explain it away. Fog. Imagination. Local wildlife. But older families in Wilkinson County shake their heads. Because they know better. The bottomlands remember. And the people who lived closest to the land say that memories can cling to places just as tightly as moss clings to trees. Especially memories born from injustice. Especially memories born from survival. What happened to Celia? No one knows. And that is exactly why her story is so powerful. Some say she lived alone in the forest for years. Some say she joined a hidden maroon community deep in the swamps. Some say she became a guide, helping runaways move north under the cover of hanging moss and moonlight. One story says she died an old woman, surrounded by people who owed their freedom to her. Another says she never died at all. That she simply became part of the forest. His voice, his shadow, his protector. Maybe she's the whisper people hear. Maybe she's the reason animals fall silent. Maybe she's the reason strangers feel watched. Or maybe she simply lived her life quietly, anonymously, finally free. But that mystery gives the story its strength. It means the South couldn't put her in a grave, in a footnote, in a forgotten record. She slipped beyond their reach forever. Why her story still matters. This story isn't just about a girl outsmarting 5 men. It's about something much bigger. A system designed to crush her, and failing. Celia didn't defeat overseers with violence. She defeated them with knowledge, patience, observation, discipline, inheritance from her mother, connection to land older than the United States itself. She was everything the plantation system feared. A survivor who knew more than they did. A child who understood the land better than any white man with a gun. A reminder that power built on violence is always weaker than power built on understanding. She proved the truth slaveholders tried to hide. That the people they enslaved were never weaker, only denied tools, space, and chance. Give someone knowledge, and time, and reason, and even the strongest oppressor becomes vulnerable. That's why the story survived. Because it teaches a lesson every generation needs to hear. Brutality is not strength. Arrogance is not intelligence. Fear is not control. And sometimes, the smallest spark, in the smallest person, can burn down the biggest lie. A quiet ending that echoes forever. If you stand in the bottomlands at dawn, at the exact time the survivor crawled back out, you can hear something uncanny. Not a ghost. Not a cry. Not a supernatural presence. Just the forest breathing. Alive. Ancient. Unchanged since the day Celia walked through it like she belonged there. You hear. Water dripping. Frogs calling. Distant birds. The soft creak of moss and wind. Then, sometimes you hear something else. A single footstep. Deliberate. Soft. Confident. A reminder that once, a girl walked through these woods untouched by the cruelty that chased her. A reminder that knowledge saved her. That arrogance destroyed them. That the land always chooses sides. And that history will always hide stories like hers. But the land never forgets. If you've watched this far, you're one of the people who care about stories buried beneath official history. So let me ask you, do you think Celia survived the forest? Or did she become part of it? Comment below. If you want more dark, hidden histories like this one, Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Because the truth is simple. Some stories don't die. They wait. And we're here to uncover them.